Hi, everybody. This is Laura Campagna, the Wednesday Witch, and I'm here with therapist Maura McDonald-Brown, and we are going to talk about the Empress card of the tarot in the waxing light of the Taurus new moon. So nice to be with you in Taurus season, Mara, and I'm really excited to talk about some of the themes that have been arising during Taurus season, such as embodiment and being human, being human in a human form. So I have been thinking a lot about the Empress card. I've been teaching a lot of tarot classes and really enjoying kind of like getting to go over the basics over and over. And the power of the Empress just like continues to impress and kind of like I feel like when you work with the archetypes of the tarot, you take them inside of you and they start to work on you. There's a transformational process with many systems of divination, including astrology. And the Empress in the tarot is the third card of the Major Arcana and is really connected with Venus, but specifically Venus and Taurus. And Taurus is Venus's fixed earth sign. That's the peak sign of spring. So, you know, we enter Aries season, which is the solar time of the year, where there starts to be more light than darkness, more day than night. I don't know about you, but I am not sleeping that late anymore. And you know, Aries really is so incredibly powerful because it brings the promise of spring and kind of restores an amount of hope to our hearts and has that like fire and that pow that really like shakes us out of the winter. But then Taurus is what makes spring real. It roots the potential down into the earth so that all of the plants and the flowers can, you know, really take root and grow and blossom. And you see a lot of blossoms beginning in Taurus season. And one thing that I've been just really noticing is how in the winter, my body is kind of like cold and shut down and a bit self-protective and kind of like closed in on itself. And then when things get warmer and the air smells good and the birds are chirping and it's like a sunny day, there's just this really natural and kind of automatic opening. And Taurus season is this really gorgeous engagement with the senses. Simultaneously, a lot of people have allergies in the spring. And whenever there's a time that kind of like brings us into our bodies, it brings up whatever resides in our bodies. And for most of us, our bodies are not always comfortable places to be, at least all the time. So this is some of what's been coming up for me in Taurus season and thinking about the embodiment that the Empress card represents in terms of like sensuality and pleasure. And all of these things, while they're kind of considered like the best stuff of life, they're also really fraught. So would love to hear any of your thoughts on the Empress and embodiment in Taurus season so far.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think what comes up for me is just thinking about spring and how the way you described Aries season as being sort of this like spark and a lot of optimism that is coming in after a long cold winter. And then Taurus season, so the way I've interpreted it based a lot on what you've shared with me both on your Instagram and on your Patreon, is that's when like the roots take hold. Like that is when it's not so much about the initiative and kind of the go of it, but sort of like what are the routines, what are the ways in which we are committed to nurturing the earth and being here. And I think that a lot of what kind of a basic tenet of therapy is this idea of a corrective emotional experience that you didn't have growing up. And so, you know, I think a lot of times we talk about like parenting, and I think sometimes people, especially people who either have had some real work and growth and on their own healing journey, or people who just aren't really into kind of the psychobabble, can really bristle against talking about parenting and why does it always go back to parenting. And I think for those of us who are parents, it's sort of like, how much more do you want us to take on in terms of responsibility? But I do think that many of us, for a lot of different factors, struggle with the idea of commitment to taking care of our bodies. And I think that can be rooted in the messages we got about worthiness or shame, or what the kind of hope is of being in your body and what your body is used for. I mean, there's so many different messages and ways that we can either misinterpret, or ways that are very explicitly explained to us that we can internalize. But then also just, I think, community based, like what are the ways in which the structures around us take care of us, and what are the ways that they fail us. And so I think for me, the Taurus season has been bringing up some of those questions around what does it mean to be in a body that I have to take care of.
Yeah, what a good what a good question. And I've been, yeah, thank you for kind of acknowledging that when we talk about, for me, being on a healing journey, there is an amount where I sometimes am like, I'm tired of hearing about this, or like, this is like enough already. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it feels like I don't want to show up for the work. You know, I don't want to floss my teeth or whatever. And it's really interesting to me because I've been thinking about this idea from my energy healing lineage, which is that we have had many lifetimes and we've had many experiences over many lifetimes, and there's patterns that get formed. And you can see those patterns in the birth chart. That's part of what the chart is describing and part of what we're decoding when we're looking at the chart. And so, you know, we have predispositions to things, and we come into this life as beings who are, you know, are new to this experience. We've never had this experience before, but we are predisposed to react in certain ways. And so I know myself, I had this idea that like being human should be like really natural and really easy, and being in your body should be really natural and really easy. And I grew up in a family with like a lot of people who are naturally very athletic and really enjoyed sports. And I am someone who I really like a walk and a hike and a bike ride and a swim. I love those things. And I'll do them for a long time, depending on the circumstances, but like competition and like, you know, the like organized sports were never my jam. And I remember being young and just having like my parents be like, why don't you bend your knees when you jump?
Yeah.
They're like, you're gonna hurt yourself. Like, why isn't it natural to you to like even know how to jump as like a child? And the truth was, I don't know the answer to that. But that I came into my body, into this lifetime, into this body with a predisposition for like a lot of different things, for different you know, I struggled with some illnesses when I was like quite young, and am personally more inclined to reside in my emotional body. I'm a very emotional person, and we have these subtle energetic bodies. There's the emotional body, there's the mental body, there's the spiritual body, there's the etheric body, the karmic body. There's also the physical body. Right. And so the physical body we can like see and touch and, have that experience of, and we can see and touch other people's. And the subtle energy bodies, they're more subtle. They're harder to kind of like get a grasp on. And it's interesting because, I think from a zoomed out perspective, it's really easy to be like, there's like, of course, some people would be residing in different bodies, and you can see people who are very cerebral and be like, they're probably hanging out in their mental body mostly, or people that are really great athletes who are very at home in their physical body. But we don't live in a culture where all things are equal, and where like all things are considered like valid or valued. So for me, being a very emotional person, hanging out in my emotional body, having like a rooted sense of identity in that place, and not being very comfortable in my physical body. And when I am in my physical body, now as an adult, I have the experience. Part of the reason why I wanted to do a yoga teacher training, which I did last year through JPCY in Boston, which was amazing and highly recommend it. But part of the reason is because I had noticed through practicing yoga for 20 years that there were just places I couldn't go. There were just places that I avoided. And when I did go there, it sometimes made me want to cry. It sometimes felt like I was like, there was too much pain and sensation. And so I think it's really interesting when we're thinking about, kind of embarking on a healing journey and engaging in some kind of holistic frameworks where people are like, take care of yourself and like do this and that. And it's like, well, that's not always easy. Like sometimes that brings up hard things.
Right. Yeah, I think I totally relate. I feel like I really live in my emotional body too. And I also really relate to not being athletic. Some members of my family continue to comment on that. I am almost 40. Not gonna happen. Don't know why we keep needing to point it out. But I think the relationship with the body is so complex. And I think for me, like bringing in feminist theory, I sometimes I think I'm just starting to think about like, what do I want from my body? I think for a long time I thought that my body needed to look a certain way, or that my body was kind of in service of like pleasure to other people. And I don't even mean necessarily like in a sexual way, although of course that's underneath a lot of it, but more of just if I want to be socially accepted or admired or loved, basically. I mean, I think that's the root of it. Then my body needs to look a certain way, and I need to figure out a way to treat my body in order to get it to look a certain way. And so I think kind of going through a transformation or a process, maybe transformation is too big of a word, where that's not, first of all, a real goal, but also something that I even have time for anymore now that I parent. I think that was like the biggest shift. And also I think maturity and recovery and all of these things. But I think that I really, for the first time, am in my body, or trying to be in my body and understand like, what is this relationship that I have with it, rather than what do I want my body to like perform. And I think and it's because I agree with you. I think that there's so many different kind of prototypes and examples of how people are in their body And even the people I think who are really, really in their bodies, like athletes, also struggle with what does their body mean to them if it can't perform, or if it starts to perform in a way like not at peak performance. And I think that it harkens back to the conversation we had about the mind, which is like all of this is really connected. Like so much illness is related to the stress that we experience, not just physically but emotionally, and how we do or do not digest that. And I think that's what is also coming up for me recently is thinking about you know, if I am in my emotional body a lot of the time and I'm trying to not be in my physical body because I don't want to feel more sensations, and then what I do, what my coping skill is to just kind of numb out in any way possible. But what happens with that is then, and another healer framed it for me in this way, is that like really there is no digestion happening. Like really I'm not digesting emotions, I'm not digesting my life experience, and so it's not going through the proper channels of release, and then I'm sort of stuck again. And I think, and I'll wrap it up with this, but I think that is also kind of what the challenge of being in a body is. Like if we're spiritual beings having a human experience, that like sometimes our body can feel super limiting, and we can really feel stuck in it.
Yeah.
In a way that's not containing all the time, I think.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting to think about Taurus and the polarity of Scorpio, which is like a lot of the like elimination processes of the body, and how there's so much in Scorpio, you know, is connected to like sex and death and like things that people are really obsessed with and really afraid of. And there's great shame in both like being mortal, having human vulnerabilities, having physical vulnerabilities and limitations. I mean, we're all going to die. We're all, you know, all of us are fallible in all these different ways. And so we would think these are just givens, but it feels like in some way there's like some fundamental shame at being human that's passed down. And then also, you know, personally, like being raised Catholic, growing up queer, knowing I was queer from a very young age. So there can be this kind of like shut down around things that end up being really hard, you know, to like open up from. And maybe we shut down to survive, and that serves us and that allows us to continue to exist in the world. I will say, you know, I personally found Catholicism especially traumatizing because it said, like, God knows all your thoughts. And I was like, cool, I'm going to heaven. Right. I'm scared. But, you know, thinking about the fact that like, when, you know, with the Empress, there is this like kind of invitation to luxuriate in the best of what life has to offer. And I feel like that's what I've been trying to invite myself into, and my clients and friends, like in Taurus season, my community is just being like, okay, the earth provides like so much beauty and wonder and simple gifts, right? Things that like you can walk outside, and even if you're in like New York City, there's usually like a bird or a leaf, at least, you know, like a tree that like you can just be like, that's beautiful, like that's amazing today, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to see this today. And since last year, and so much like loss, I've been really trying to make a conscious effort of being like, I love being on earth. Like, I love being human. I love being embodied. I love having the opportunity to experience what I am experiencing, even though I don't actually like all of it, you know. But I want to try to recognize what does feel really like a gift in if not equal measure to the things that feel difficult, but just making a mindfulness practice around it, because I think that you know, I have thought a lot about the fact that like, okay, Taurus season is hosts Mother's Day, which we just had, which is like, you know, a really fraught holiday for a lot of people. And I do think that the veneration of, or at least the acknowledgement of how amazing so many people who do mothering work are, how so many mothers are, all of the like emotional labor and feminized care that doesn't get compensated under capitalist patriarchy. I mean, it's like basically, it's like, here's a whole lot of work that has to happen in order for society to function that we're not going to pay anyone to do. We're just going to like socialize people into gender roles and expect them to do it. And of course, that's been changing in the past few generations, and I like rapidly. And I have enjoyed seeing, just like in my own lifetime, noticing how different I feel like men parented when I was growing up, and versus how men of my generation and below parent. And that's actually given me a lot of hope. Although I have thought it was really funny when I see dudes in New York City being really aggressive with baby carriages. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You would take it there. But I think that, you know, part of like the practice of Mother's Day of like giving people flowers and like, you know, it's all rooted to me in this like Taurus season. Okay, life is a precious gift. But like under patriarchy, we don't consider life a precious gift. We don't compensate people who parent well. You know, we don't give them what they need economically to ensure that they can take care of themselves. And so I feel like what the Empress looks like for some people is really, really different. A really amazing astrologer and tarot reader and healer, Diana Rose Harper, has a fabulous workshop and several online lectures about radical self-care, because depending on who you are and your position in society, what self-care looks like, your access to resources and to spare time, and the historic legacy of like oppression of your community and your ancestors, like it's really different. Like radical means something really different for like white people, white women, than like women of color and non-binary and trans folks. And so really, I am hoping to kind of open up this, the archetype of the Empress as something that can and should apply to everyone, and thinking about like, okay, what does it mean for you? Like, what does embodiment look like and feel like for you, just like today, you know? Because the other thing I think is that in healing, it can often feel like, okay, there's a trajectory, and what we're going towards is like being healed. Mm-hmm. Just achieve wholeness, you know, just like wrap it on up, you know. And it's like, that's not an end goal. Like in this lifetime, for most of us, if we're like karmic beings with like all the stuff we have going on in our systems, like we're in process till the day we die. And that's actually can be like a huge relief, and really really validating of the process, and like letting ourselves off the hook of needing to like get better, you know, get well soon, or achieve some state of harmony that might not ever happen for some folks. And so just kind of wanted to invite people into this meditation of humanness and human challenges, and perhaps human limitations and embodiment, and thinking about, okay, just for this moment in 2021, you know, what does like connecting with the archetype of the Empress who sits to receive mean for you in your specific time and place?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I love, you know, how you're broadening it and deepening it at the same time. Wondering if the Empress, because my like kind of automatic reaction to that, which I think speaks volumes, is like receiving. So if I'm like opening myself up to like enjoy life's bounty, and this might just be my addiction showing, but like, how do I know I'm not going to go too far? You know?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I think it's interesting in terms of just like how we're socialized, and to your point, all of us are socialized really differently in some ways, and then I think there's a lot of similarities in just a lot of kind of our human curiosities and instincts as we're little are conditioned out of us because we have to, or at least, you know, we think we have to. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say there's a lot of stuff that we do as toddlers that we need to not do. But then there's a lot of stuff I think that we're conditioned out of that is like quite natural and beautiful, and maybe we shouldn't be so quick to reject it. But I think that there is that the kind of legacy of shame that you were referencing, I think is something I really think about on a regular basis in parenting a toddler, and just this I think idea of how the way all of us were kind of taught to think about like our wanting to engage in the world, and like our wanting to explore the world, and our wanting to relish in it and enjoy it, and you know, like cover ourselves with every inch of experiencing what was around us. And how I think sometimes, you know, I think sometimes we received the message that like it was natural to explore, and that it was safe to explore, and that was something that was celebrated and pushed and encouraged. And then I think other times the message that we received was no, just flat out no, that's not something, like you could do this, this could happen, you could get hurt. And so I think that is an interesting thing about like breathing into the Empress archetype as well for me, is how much can I trust myself, and how much can I trust the world around me to just enjoy kind of moment to moment what is being offered to me, without kind of trying to hoard it all because I don't know when I'm going to get it again, and without kind of shying away from it because I'm expecting the worst to happen.
Yeah. And I think like what you said before about, you know, what one of your healers was saying, like you have to kind of be open to be open, right? Mm-hmm. And I was really found that to be a super like kind of get out of here kind of statement, where they're like, well, you're shut down, and if you're trying to protect yourself from pain, you can't experience pleasure. And it's like, right. Okay, well, why don't you experience excruciating pain and then stay open to the world, you know? And maybe they were and have, but the point is that like that's one of those things that I think can like provoke a lot of shame in folks, and feeling like I'm broken and I can't get fixed. And when I'll say like it's really common to approach healing from a perspective of like there's something wrong with me, you know. And most of us are led to healing through a struggle or like some sort of issue or an illness or pain, but you know, seeing that as like part of the journey and not like an interruption of it, or as like facilitating, you know, something larger rather than like throwing a big wrench in the smooth working of my life under capitalism, where I'm supposed to be like endlessly achieving, and hitting like some benchmarks of normalcy, which, you know, I think that those benchmarks exist for a lot of reasons and aren't sustainable for a lot of reasons. The nuclear family system doesn't really seem like it's providing people with enough support in many ways. But I I do think that when we're thinking about coming from the point of view of addiction, it's really hard to trust yourself. It's really hard to be like, oh yeah, I used to do that. That wasn't good, but I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'll just kind of like dip my toe in here. And I think that, you know, different people have different roads to recovery, but coming into a spiritual kind of process where you can experience pleasure and you can experience pain, and you don't go and kind of get too deep in either direction, seems to be a necessary part of people's, you know, recovery journey, who seem to like recover over the long term. There has to be kind of this this model of moving towards moderation. And I know we talked about before this, like thinking about like the Empress and then the Emperor. So thinking about like self-discipline and needing structure in order to be healthy, in order to like do those daily tasks and show up for oneself. But yeah, like often when we're younger, authority can come in the form that feels overly harsh or feels domineering or was oppressive. But I think, you know, those of us that do caretaking for little kids, like little kids will do things that are dangerous, and you just like simply like my niece was like gonna walk off of like a really sharp high ledge, you know, the other day, and I had to like pick her up, and she was upset about it, and I was like, that's okay, baby, like you don't need to know like why that, but like, you know, for her there's just that frustration, and she was still kicking her little legs really, like she's a Leo, she's real determined, she's like, I'm still gonna walk even if I'm walking in the air. And it's interesting because going back to what I said about kind of this idea that like being a human is a natural process for people, I, you know, had this idea that, oh, babies, they're just super chill. And like witnessing babies that made me really think like, this is fascinating. It's fascinating to watch how everybody comes in with like a different set of like predilections, and how, I mean, I love watching my nieces and nephews for all their moon signs and like seeing the ways they nourish themselves and seeing the ways that they like connect with each other. And you know, there's a lot of Taurus and Capricorn moons in my family, which is like really different, you know, and watching how, you know, I used to think, oh, you just give a baby a bottle and then it sits there like it's a cartoon. And, you know, often the kids are like squirming and they're moving around and they don't feel like they're ever going to chill. And then they're getting up and they're walking around, the bottles fall. And it's just like being human, man. Like it's just like a whole thing. And it doesn't look easy from the jump. And so thinking about embodiment and being a human being, you know, what stories and narratives can we create that helps empower the generations that are coming up now so that they don't feel like they're weird for having like stuff going on internally, or that they like should feel really natural and fluid and effortless at doing this when it's actually like a really confusing process, even if we've been, you know, doing it for thousands of years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, you know, first just kind of touching on the addiction thing for a second, and then moving on to what you were just speaking about. I think the like addiction, and from my perspective, is just like a really extreme human experience where
Mhm.
like you are just sometimes like literally naked in ways that other people aren't always. And just, you know, if you're really in your addiction, kind of have a harder time of um, hiding your pain and your humanness. But I think your overall point is well taken. And I think I'm like sitting into it now of just that there's so much about being human that we shouldn't, that I think we're taught that we should try to avoid or overcome. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and also when you're bringing in just like the little ones, is making really clear to me that I have to remind myself of, especially like I've told you before we started recording, and just kind of in an act of transparency, like I'm not like I've been struggling a little bit of just like kind of being human lately. And I think that when that happens, when like there is some struggle, my kind of automatic want is to figure out how to fix this so it doesn't happen again. And I think that's a lot of what like we see in like the wellness sort of movement, like, and especially like I think on Instagram, or other social media outlets. But I think the place that I see really talked about a lot in sort of a critical and necessarily critical way is just the idea that we should, and I've seen Diana too post about this too, we should constantly be trying to elevate ourselves kind of out of these, out of our suffering, or out of just like what is a natural human experience. And I think that's a real bomb for me to hear today. And I think that when I'm not in the suffering, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people, when I'm not in the suffering, that's something I can really, I can lead with, or I can like be coming from that place. But when I'm the person experiencing the suffering, I'm like, well, there's gotta be, there's gotta be some trick to this so that we don't, so that this doesn't keep happening, so that like I can elevate myself to the next level of human, where like I don't get bogged down in the same old shit. And I think, you know, with like little ones, a lot of the times I think like we have learned kind of in better parenting approaches that, you know, if your niece is walking or crawling or wanting to move her body and she's doing it in a dangerous place, you just like you don't say the instinct is wrong, you just put her in a place where she can exercise that same instinct where it's safer.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm trying to apply that to my own kind of understanding of this conversation too in this moment for adults, of just maybe the, you know, the I can't really make the connection quite yet between the instinct to explore and kind of the instinct to be in suffering, because I don't know that they are, I don't know that it's an instinct. I think, okay, I'll end by saying this. I think me framing it as like the instinct to be in suffering also leaves room for, well, why can't I have an instinct to like elevate, to be out of suffering?
No, I think we do. Yeah. I mean, I think that exploration of our pain is like absolutely necessary, right? I think that like part of what's really hard for people who have like, you know, experienced early childhood trauma or whatever, have whatever kind of setup for addiction or issues that they have, this like trust that the pain will pass, right? That like the pain will, you know, if I'm in yoga class and they're like, do this posture, and I like drop into this posture that is like, makes me flooded with memories, and then I feel like I need to cry, and I'm, you know, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to have that experience, but is the solution to avoid moving my body in a way that like helps me feel more calm and relaxed? No, I think it's to titrate, like have, you know, small doses of those experiences in safe environments. And yeah, you know, one of the things that's really interesting about some of the spiritual leaders that I follow is like, people are just like, we don't awaken from contentment, you know, like most people who are like seeking something more than just the like gratification of pleasure and the senses and like winning at the game of capitalism, that they are driven by their own suffering. And I feel like on my own path that divinity has used my suffering and has used the things that have been most difficult for me to help me to get to a place of greater healing. that isn't true for everything, and that's definitely not everyone's experience, but like that has been something that I've seen work in my life that has made me feel really like held and cared for and guided and not like alone in my suffering. But that being said, you know, I think that it is a lot to ask people to kind of deal with their feelings without a kind of supportive framework to work with them through. And I was watching that Demi Lovato documentary on YouTube, and she was just talking about like being sober sucks when you have all this terrible stuff coming up. And I'm really grateful that a lot of folks I know have like found relief from the things that cause them to want to use through going through different programs of recovery that like help them to unpack the things that they were like running from or hiding from or made it be so difficult to sit in their bodies. Because until we can, you know, thinking about that session, that conversation we had with Lorraine about presence, like until we can kind of like be inhabiting this form comfortably, it's really hard to be present. And if we're present, it's really hard to have intimacy. And if we don't have intimacy, it's really hard to feel connected. And that's all of like, you know, I think what all of us are seeking. And I think that's like definitely like what's, you know, promised in the Empress card is that like that presence and that intimacy and that connection on both like a physical and a heart level, and an emotional level. And I think about, you know, the fact that patriarchy has socialized people for so long to really denigrate the divine feminine and feel like you can't have access to this, you can't embody this, it isn't safe for everyone to, you know, embody femininity in public. Like especially like trans women of color are constantly like under attack and have such horribly high mortality rates because patriarchy, you know, attacks this beautiful archetype of the Empress. In different manifestations and forms. And so really thinking about, you know, when part of what I'm thinking about with Uranus and Taurus and this kind of like shakeup of the way things have been done in the past, because Uranus is the planet that like wants to liberate us and wants to free us from like what isn't serving and wants to like encourage us and empower us to live our most authentic, true selves. And for many of us, that will be going towards embodiment of the divine feminine in different ways. And for some people will be like moving away from traditional manifestations of femininity, but that, you know, there has to be this like kind of like reconfiguring in the 21st century. I think if we're gonna really make it as a species and as a planet, because it is connected to like the overall wellness and our relationship to the earth. So I know I kind of like went in a few different tangents there. But yeah, that's some of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking, how do I, in studying tarot and astrology, how do I embody and elevate my experience of these energies?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, I think that we can't talk about embodiment in the 21st century. What century are we in? Are we in the 21st century?
We are. Can you believe?
Which lifetime am I inhabiting right now?
I know.
Yeah, no, I don't think we can talk about being embodied without talking about capitalism and the patriarchy and white supremacy, and you know, moving towards the divine feminine, because I think even you know, I mean, I've struggled with depression for a long time, so I think I can be pretty candid in saying that like sometimes I think a element of being a little conflicted or ambiguous or ambivalent, I guess is a better word, of taking care of myself is like, what's the point? Like, am I gonna take care of myself so that I can go work for 40 hours a week, you know? And I think for me right now, my career is aligned with like being of service. And I think that like being of service and kind of aligning with the divine is has been extremely helpful for me in every way, but specifically in sort of motivation to be like make difficult choices in terms of like self-discipline or or taking care of myself, and like a lot of my defenses are to indulge or whatever. But I think that that is a really important element of the conversation, is like how much of our being embodied and how much of this like healing that we're really asked to center is in service of just productivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how do we reclaim it so that we can align to our own truths of what it means to show up fully in the world in a way that I think rejects patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy, but also allows us to like have our physical needs met of like housing. Like how do you, I'm going off topic, so I'm going to stop talking in a minute, but like how do you kind of change the system while also needing to be in the system? And I think that for me sometimes is like I can't show up to the world in like a revolutionary way or like be a part of the change that I want to be a part of unless like I'm getting enough sleep.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it reminds me of that Audre Lorde essay, The Erotic is Power, and this idea that, you know, Taurus also is connected to commerce, it's connected to money. I think that's probably why I keep talking about capitalism, because, you know, there hasn't actually, to my knowledge, been like a form, like a system of social organizing that hasn't been exploitative. I mean, there has been in like certain cultures and places, but you know, in modern times and like worldwide, like there's just a really long history of exploitation. Of course, like white supremacy and European culture has its own history that's particularly bad, but I think that capitalism is a problem, and also I don't know that we're going to create something better unless we show up for some radical healing work as a society and as individuals. And part of what I love about that Audre Lorde essay is that, you know, she talks about the erotic and sexuality and sensuality as like a form of power. And if, you know, there's a lot of like patriarchy has a lot to lose from people being empowered around their sexuality and their bodies and really like reclaiming pleasure. Because if you're satisfied in one area of your life, if you're satisfied romantically, if you're satisfied sexually, then you're going to not be so willing to go into work and take crap from your boss, and you're not going to be so willing to like show up for the like, you know, abusive dynamics of like your family or whatever it is. You know, there is this raising of the bar and this elevating of our quality of life when we are able to give and receive pleasure that has ripple effects and is threatening to the status quo. So I'll put a link to that essay. It's from a collection called Sister Outsider that I recommend for everyone. It's so excellent and fabulous. But I think that, yeah, when we are talking about what am I healing for? What is the point of life, and what am I healing towards, and what am I healing for? I think that's something that everyone has to answer for themselves. I know personally that I've gotten so much relief out of from doing my own healing work, especially energy healing. But that as a Capricorn, I tend to go really, really, really hard towards doing, and the like being part is so much more difficult to me. And whenever I talk to like a Taurus friend, they're like, I just took a nap, I'm in my hammock, I'm reading my book. I'm like, right, pleasure, good reminder, thank you. Like, halt. Am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Like, can I nap if I need one? So I think that there's always more to kind of unpack, but I think that's a good place to start wrapping up. Is there anything else you wanted to say? I know you were interested in kind of like different elements of the challenges around being human. If there's anything you wanted to.
No, I think all that will come up in due time. I think I'm just really left. I think this conversation has stirred up so much in me, and I think this was I think I learned as much, or like was given as much to think about as I ever have. Like, I think like I'm having the experience of someone sort of like listening to a podcast, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh wow, there's so much I have to unpack here. As compared to, I think, other topics. I think this is really, I think the embodiment and the pleasure principle specifically are just, I'm noticing a lot of kind of like, this is an area for me.
They're biggies. Yeah. Where's that Venus? What's she saying to you? Right now she's in Gemini. So, but in your chart, you know, looking at your Venus is like a way to access like what does pleasure and what is beauty, what's your, you know, own signature on that. But for those who want to, you know, go deeper with the Empress archetype on your own, I think just meditating with that card, like spending some time just like looking at it, noticing what pops to you, noticing what you like, noticing what feels a little bit like a turn off, closing your eyes, meditating with it, really trying to conjure it in your mind's eye, and then doing like a free write about it can be really powerful. And that's some of the stuff that I've seen and heard and recommended and done myself and recommend to my students. So
I love that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining us for this conversation on the Empress and embodiment in Taurus season and physicality and being human. And we look forward to chatting with you next time. And if you are thinking about how can I learn more about Taurus or Venus in my own chart, I am available for readings, and you can book through Laura Campagna astrology.com. And Maura, you are also often doing really amazing writings. And where can they find you?
I am at thoroughly mediocre depression.com.
Still funny to me.
Never gets old.
Thank you so much.